Welcome everyone to Rock M Radio. This is a brand new episode of Dive Cut. Here to talk all things Mizzou Basketball. For your listening needs, I'm your host Sam Snelling. And with me today, two Matts for the price of one. To your right, upper right, I guess if you're watching this on the YouTubes, is Matthew Harris, our basketball editor. And the adjunct professor, Matt Watkins, is on the bottom, pulling things up. Gentlemen, how are you? How are you both? It's been several weeks for everybody doing a podcast.
I'm well. As we step on each other right there, I'm fine. This is weird to be going an hour earlier than usual, but I'm gonna power through and do moderately quality broadcasting for the listeners.
As kind of the de facto leader of the podcast, I've always tried to be pretty malleable about the time we start. For those who have been paying attention to our start times, if it's going late, you can usually assume that Matthew Harris is the guest. If it's going early, then you have to know that Matt Watkins is involved. So if you prefer the later times, then you can blame the guy down here. No, but we thought, since it's been a few weeks, Watkins, it's been like a month since you've been on.
Thereabouts.
You had a little vacation.
It's one way to put it.
Nice. And yeah, so there's been a lot that's happened in that month, although not a lot has happened. But the one big thing that we've all kind of been waiting to happen very clearly is the commitment of Josh Gray. Commitment of Josh Gray did finally happen. He is finally a Tiger, or going to be, I guess. Still technically needs to be enrolled, but the commitment happened. The graphic went out. That usually means that NIL papers have been agreed to, and we should see Josh Gray joining the roster. Mr. Watkins, since you've been the longest without talking on the podcast here, what are your impressions of this finally coming to a conclusion?
Well, I've been very busy at work, and it pretty much coincided with the last time that Mizzou had any activity as far as signings go. So it kind of feels like I didn't miss a whole lot. In that month or so that we were waiting for official word. But as far as Gray himself, I think it's a good pickup. I mean, is he going to be an all SEC big man? Probably not. Does Mizzou need interior strength? Yes, they do, especially with the trade being officially formalized. Jordan Butler to South Carolina for Josh Gray back to Mizzou. Once Butler left, they needed someone. I think before then they wanted someone. But with Gray, there's not a lot of guesswork. You know what you're going to get. There may be a little bit of margin around the edges. That could he underperform a little bit? Maybe. Could he overperform a little bit? Also maybe. But you're getting a 10, 15, maybe on certain nights, 20 minutes per game type guy that's, he's going to rebound. He's going to offer some defense. He's going to be that guy that when they get into the meat grinder of SEC play that isn't going to get absolutely annihilated defensively on the post, which, that wasn't the biggest problem with last year's team, but it was a problem. So, I like the pickup. I think he fills a need. Of the five guys that they added, I'm probably individually the least excited about him, but that doesn't mean he's not good. Of the five guys they added, he's probably the second most important. I don't know, second, third. So it's just kind of he's a plate of vegetables, I guess. He's good for you, but you may not be the most excited about eating it.
Using the old Nate Edwards adage there. That's
I didn't even know that was that, but yes, it's a nutritious meal. It would help.
Yeah, in the early days of the Drinkwitz era, Edwards would frequently talk about eating your vegetables
well, there you go.
and building up the roster and all that kind of stuff. And and doing what's necessary. And that's definitely like one of these things that Gray is going to provide. I don't think like anybody here, really maybe anybody anywhere is going to try to convince anyone that Gray is some world-beating pickup. But for what Missouri was looking for and what Missouri needed, he's pretty on the nose. Big physical guy, defends the ball well, rebounds well, can block shots, can provide some level of rim protection, some beef. He's strong. For a team that has been absolutely horrendous in interior defense, pretty atrocious at the rim defensively, and absolutely has not been able to secure defensive rebounds. He's a guy, he topped out last year, I think at like 18 minutes was sort of like the most he played all year. Like, that's probably going to be his role at Missouri. And if you get a guy who's going to step in and sort of top out in like the high teens for minutes, but he's going to give you those things when he's on the court, like replaying what he did for South Carolina last year, I would not be unhappy with that. Mr. Harris?
The way I sort of look at it, this pickup is kind of is the inverse of what we saw last year when they were trying to fill a spot with Connor Vanover. It felt like Missouri really edged, towards skill last year when it was making pickups. That was sort of the calculus was, all right, we're going to, we figured out that we can, play really fast. We can outskill this league and we can make teams, adapt to us. And, when they took Connor Vanover, that was not a horrible defensive pickup, but it was basically the premise of, well, this guy's swing skill is spacing the floor. He's going to, help us keep doing what we want to do on offense. Taking Jesus Carolero Martin, was a guy that, defensively had not been good against high majors, but he theoretically was a scheme fit on offense. That was sort of the thing that tipped the scale was could they, provide some juice on offense? Well, we saw what happened. And they didn't have any alphas on offense, and they couldn't defend and rebound to save their lives. They got their heads caved in. And that's not to say that offensive skill and scoring is unimportant, but there comes a time, I think, when you have to acknowledge that in this league, even if the skill level was higher last year, it's still a league where you're going to have high-level athletes, where you're still going to have plays that are made at the rim, and you still need guys who can be disruptive defensively to how the other teams want to play. Josh Gray does that. Like, I don't, when I've been on the pod the past couple of times, even when I wrote the commitment piece, I'm not trying to sell anyone on the idea that Josh Gray is going to come in and jump from 4 points a game to 10 or 11. But, with a little bit more efficiency, maybe he gets to 6. But what he does do and what he's consistently done is what you both have talked about and what we've talked about, ad nauseum for the last month as we've waited for this is he defends, he rebounds, he rim protects. He does all the things that this roster lacked at times last year. And I think there's a concession to the reality of, sure, you can maybe make Tennessee or Alabama or Florida or A&M adapt to you for a little bit. But at the end of the day, you know what Alabama did? They just put more bigs on the floor, not rebounded Missouri. You know what Tennessee did last year? Put 2 bigs on the floor and smashed them on the glass and went and got misses. So even if Missouri did do a good job in first shot defense, it didn't matter because Tennessee was going to send bodies to the glass. Same with A&M. Like, there was a certain reality that I think has sort of settled in here that you can go get skilled guys and you can run what you want to run on offense, but if you can't close possessions and if you can't do, the basics of what team defense demands, it doesn't matter what kind of skill you have or what your stylistic approach is. You're still going to have a kind of a ceiling. So I think, to me, what the some of these additions have done, even on Mark Mitchell, we're going to talk about what his ceiling is offensively. Mark Mitchell spent 2 years as one of the best perimeter defenders in college basketball. Tony Perkins is fantastic defending on the ball when he's in a system that's engaged. They went and got guys that do the very things that winning teams do, which is defend, rebound, and disrupt a little bit. So I think that's sort of the thing I take away here is I think there's a concession that was needed to kind of the reality of the league that Missouri plays in right now. Be skilled, find guys that fit what you want to do, but don't take that, at the trade-off of doing the basic fundamentals right of good basketball. So, Gray's not fancy. I'm not going to sit here and try and convince anybody that they should be over the moon here, but what they should be happy about, I think, is that Missouri looked at what happened in the last 2 years and said, okay, we have to fix these things. These things can't continue. I think it's a recognition by this staff of where they are and what they need to do to maybe take that next level. I think they can play a style that's fun and that's open, but it can't be forsaking all the very things that are going to, help them find some consistency. So that's not a fun way to view it, but that's sort of how I've come to sort of, take in this offseason for them.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, when you cover a lot of analytics, you talk about analytics, you look at things in this per possession basis, right? And one of the things that Missouri was able to get away with 2 years ago that they weren't able to get away with last year was the amount of possessions that they bled on the defensive glass. Giving their first shot defense was good enough to really be an elite team, but where they ended up getting crushed was, the defensive efficiency numbers were poor because they were giving up so many second chances. It doesn't matter. If you're really looking at cleaning up your margins, and I think this is one of the things that we always talk about, how do you flip games? How do you get from 6-12 to 12-6? And that's basically there's always going to be games that you should win at home. There's always going to be games that you should lose on the road. What do you do in the middle? And what you do in the middle is generally determined by incremental changes at the margins. Missouri had to understand that you can be as efficient as you want to, and they were 2 years ago one of the most efficient offensive teams. You know who else was really efficient offensively last year was Alabama. And Alabama got beat a lot because they couldn't stop anybody. And everybody's on board, the Alabama, train coming in here, especially if Mark Sears comes back. But nobody wants to talk about the fact that even going into the NCAA tournament, they were giving up 100+ points to Florida, and losing. So until they started actually kind of getting some stops in that end and getting defensive rebounds, and however you want to equate defensive efficiency, this was always going to be something that was going to concern you during the Gates era until you saw it fixed. And I think this sort of naturally gives us the pivot to talking about the transfer roster class as a whole. And Watkins, you sort of led the poll on Twitter asking people what they sort of graded. So the class is Tony Perkins, Marcus Warwick, Jacob Cruz, Mark Mitchell, Josh Gray, 5 transfers, and what the grade was. And 57% of people voted B, 38% voted A, only 5% said C, and 0% of DF. I think actually I may have voted D or F just to see what the results were. Sure. But not enough to out of 650 votes. So that's there may have been a couple in there, but 0% overall. I think most people are on board with the idea this is about as good of a class as you could have expected.
You throwing it to me?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, I like it. I mean, as a whole, the 5 guys in total, I would, if I had to give a grade, would give it an A. And the reasons why are that Mizzou needed 2, maybe 3 things, depending on how it shook out. You needed a point guard. Mizzou got a point guard. We can debate whether he's the type of point guard that is best for what Mizzou's wanting to do, but what we can't debate is that last year he was a point guard in the Big Ten, made second team All Big Ten. I mean, he's a good player. He's legit. If you look at a guy coming back to this roster and say, hey, do you have any all-league players? Tony Perkins. I mean, right. What else do you need to see? The Big Ten is maybe not quite as good as the SEC. Maybe it's better. I don't know. It's a irrelevant debate to me. They're both high major teams with multiple elite teams and tournament quality teams. So the things I like about him are that, as Matt Harris mentioned just a minute ago, he can be a very good defender. He's 6'4". We all love Nick Honor here, but there were times last year as a point guard that he simply couldn't defend because guys shot over him. It's a limitation. That's gone. So I really like the Tony Perkins edition, and then also with Mark Mitchell, he has, at least to my knowledge, not been an all high major league player yet, but I think he has the highest ceiling of anyone on the team personally. And when you look at what Mizzou was lacking in last year's team versus the 2022-2023 edition with Kobe Brown, Mark Mitchell is not yet Kobe Brown as a senior, but where he tracks very similarly is to Kobe Brown after his sophomore year. As we all remember, Kobe couldn't shoot. I mean, he was a 23% three-point shooter. Kobe has a little bit better passing skill in my estimation than Mark does, but I think Mark's a little bit more athletic.
Yeah.
But where the similarities merge is that I think he is going to be used in a lot of the same ways that Kobe Brown was. And when you look at last year, Noah Carter was tasked with that. Wasn't quite up to it, playing the point, we'll call it, from the high post. Jesus Carolero couldn't shoot, couldn't really defend, so that was always going to be a problem. But with Mark Mitchell, you're adding a high-level future NBA prospect in my mind at that position, and if just one or two things go well that he hasn't already shown, I think you're adding a guy who's immediately capable of being an all-league player in the SEC, especially in this system. With Mark going to a different team, I may not say that, but with Mizzou, I think the fit is great. So to me, you added two immediate impact, high-level starter types that are going to be impactful for winning in the SEC. Then you drop down a notch, and not to diminish the other guys, but I look at Jacob Cruz as a one-skill guy. He's 6'8", but his one skill is probably the most important in basketball. He shot, 41% from three-point range last year, did it off the catch, did it off the bounce. Having a guy like that is vital. Even if he's maybe a little bit of a defensive liability, we'll see. We'll see how he transfers up. But, he's really good in that regard. And then also Marquez Warwick. He's probably I don't want to say the weakest defensively, but that's the biggest question mark with him. If he was a total package and he was Northern Kentucky's all-time leading scorer, he would have been highly, highly coveted instead of just getting high major offers. But I think what he does is he gives you that usage aspect that Mizzou was probably lacking going into last year. And what I mean by that is he's a guy that's going to get shots up and do it relatively efficiently. And as I've said, probably on every podcast, someone's got to shoot the ball. So having him do that is helpful. Yeah. And then, of course, Josh Gray, who we've already talked about. But, all the itches that needed scratched have been scratched, and they've added 2 all-league players along the way, at least in my estimation. It's hard to do anything but say that's an A, at least in terms of results.
Yep. We talked about this last night. I still view this as, the same way that I had, math teachers through high school and at college. There's results, and then, there's still one where you got to put pen on paper and you got to show how you got your answer. And you may get the proper answer, but there may be some points lost along the way from process. It doesn't diminish, the results, it doesn't make it any worse. It's just there's some areas you could clean up, or maybe you could, get ready for the final. To me, it's a B+ class. And I say that as like an 88 or an 89. Like, it's not like
versus an 87.
It's close. Well, it's closer to an A- than it is a straight B. I think the one thing you do have to account for this is they went into the portal looking for a big. I don't think a big was ever really in need for this team. I think some people would say Jordan Butler looked like he struggled at times last year. Jordan Butler played the appropriate amount of minutes for what he was rated coming out of high school. I thought, when I went back and looked at the tape down the stretch run, I thought another season of strength and conditioning work would have gotten him to the point where a lot of those issues would have been addressed, particularly against more traditional fives.
Didn't you write about that last fall?
Yeah. I wrote about all this last fall, and hey, all those things came true. And, I don't think his freshman year was atypical whatsoever. I get that maybe that you would have wanted to see more from the jumper, but freshmen sometimes shoot the ball poorly. There were no alarm bells going off in my mind about Jordan Butler's development after a freshman year. If they had wanted to go get Josh Gray off the rip and bring him in and say, look, we just had injury issues last year. We want to make sure that we have another depth piece, and we might want to put a red shirt on Trent Burns, just so Trent can get a year, just so we know we've got some depth. But Jordan, we're invested in your development. Looking at Terrace Reed, a guy who, I think has not quite played up to his potential yet, doesn't mean that he won't get there. Dan Hurley believes in it enough to bring him in and have him replace Donovan Clingan. So that's not a knock on Terrace's quality, but the thought is you needed to bring in a guy who was going to give you proven production, who was going to be ready to step right in and do that. I don't know if Terrace necessarily qualified for that. There was still some risk associated with that. You were still going to have to develop Terrace a little bit. But, Jordan can see, when Missouri's recruiting a Terrace Reed or even a Javon Porter who can slide down and play the 5. And, that guy is one you committed a lot of energy to recruiting, and he goes out the door. Now you have to get a big. And as I wrote about this week, when he leaves, there's a paucity of starter level bigs. Did you need to go down that road at all? Did you have the opportunity cost of developing a big you liked coming out of high school? And are you now in a position where your bigs as a group, this is not to pick on them, are probably your weakest group here? And, we just spent time talking about how Missouri needs to be better, rebounding needs to be better on interior defense. I think they're going to be better, but would Josh Gray have made a materially better difference, or would developing Jordan Butler into a guy who could play 24 minutes a game with a depth piece made a difference? So I think you have to account for that. I think that there's and in this area, it's hard to go through an offseason unscathed. I think maybe they got into a situation where they didn't have to go look for a big, and they may have cost themselves a developmental prospect. That's not to say Jordan Butler is going to become an all-conference level guy, but I think they could have just kept it simple, taken 4 guys, developed Butler this offseason, and still, if they had wanted to, go back and gotten Josh Gray for depth. I think the process cost them a developmental piece in the long term. And again, as I wrote about, if you got to go back in the portal to get a big, they're not cheap. They're, so I feel like you have to account for that process somewhere in there. Even if it's not showing up right now, I think it's something that you have to at least point out. You could dock them for that. So that's sort of how I get to the B+. But everything Watkins said about all the other guys, the other 4 that were brought in before we got to the big man situation, can't find anything to nitpick there. I think he's absolutely on point with all of those things, with all the sort of points that he made.
So Sam asked us to grade the class, and then Matt broadened it out a little bit and grade the roster management situation. So I agree with some of the things he said.
Grade the class.
He's looking at it like a physics equation instead of I
don't think that was quite the question. That's fine. You're on the record now.
Well, you were both on the record as giving them a better grade than the F- that I gave them on the forums.
True.
I was accused by Ala Tiger of being hacked. I was not hacked. I was making a joke. The second time I've made that joke, I did so. I think was that our private Slack conversation? I said that as well. I do not think it was an F-. I probably am a little bit more towards high B than a complete A. I've been on record all spring as wanting a second ball handler. Maybe Warwick turns out to be that guy. Maybe not. I don't really know how they plan on using him at this point. But what I wanted is I really wanted a point guard and a secondary ball handler and somebody that you could mix in at the point with Robinson. That's what I thought was going to be a better mix. Warwick throughout his career has not really been a primary ball handler. or even really a secondary ball handler. He does handle the ball a lot. Maybe that's enough. But if we're strictly going on what I would have done, since I'm not really in charge of this, it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I probably would have moved more as a secondary point guard, a combo guard. I do like the pickup of Mark Mitchell. I know you'll be shocked to learn that.
Bold stance.
Sam likes good player.
I like talent, and honestly, like this was the conversation that we've all had surrounding like Terrace Reed, and and even Javon Porter. Like I was always more on board with going down the Reed route because I believed in his talent and what he was projected to be, and just sort of thought he was going to stall a little bit in a system that really wasn't taking advantage of his overall skill set. And I think you see a lot of those same things in Mitchell. Clearly, coming out of high school, Mitchell was the higher recruited player. I mean, he was a McDonald's All-American. It's hard to argue with, with somebody 6'9", wing forward who can guard all 5 positions. Oh God, what a terrible thing to have on your roster. But overall, yeah, I'd say like it's a high B. I hope that they're still able to take this influx of talent along with everybody that's coming back and find a way to make the rotations work. I think that's going to be my transition into our next topic here. I don't like that view. Let's go to this one. And that's the roster count. It's the Missouri basketball roster for everybody to see here on YouTube. If you're on rockm.plus, the forums, I posted it there. I think a scholarship count thing post is coming maybe this weekend to Rock'em Nation main site. But here we go. We have 18 total spots. Still a possibility of maybe some additional walk-ons coming on. But that is a full roster, especially when you're talking about 4. We're including Caleb Grill. I don't think we're breaking any news here by placing a theoretical bet that Caleb Grill is going to be on the roster next season. But that's 4 super seniors, 2 seniors, 2 juniors, 2 sophomores, and 5 freshmen.
That's a loaded deck. It'll be interesting to see what the minutes are going to look like. I think for the freshmen at the back end of that rotation, and I'm thinking of a T.O. Barrett. I'm thinking of a Trent Burns. Probably the swing one is going to be, Marcus Allen. There's a real crowded house there at the 3 and the 4 spot, which is where he sort of overlaps. But I think they're probably going to be able to go 10 or 11 deep, which is what they've aspired to do. The question's going to be, I think as the season goes on, you generally see teams kind of winnow it down and really find the 8 or 9 guys, usually around 8, that work best for them. So I think they can start wide, but it's going to be interesting when they start to get into February and maybe they want to start chopping things down a little bit, who falls, towards the back of the pack right now. But right now I'd sort of look at those 3 freshmen, that aren't Honor Batang and aren't Peyton Marshall and sort of say, what do their minute allocations look like at this point? I think when I looked at Bart Torvik's projections, the cut line was sort of falling down there around Marcus Allen, around the 10th or 11th spot. But there was a, pretty good consensus that Batang and Marshall were going to see some minutes. So we'll see. But otherwise, I think it's pretty easy to spot who's going to be in the rotation next year among them. It's going to be Caleb Grill, it's going to be Tamar Bates, and then it's going to be the 5 newcomers. That's going to be your 7 of your guys. And which
Jeremy
freshman?
Sanchez.
Don't sleep. Don't sleep.
And there's something to be said for enthusiastic bench mob. And as much as Jackson Francois tried to carry that torch last year, it maybe needed a few more wins to kind of help the other guys get involved. But
Maybe we just needed more enthusiasm.
Jeremy
Is that what it
Sanchez
was?
picked up an endorsement from Benny Buckets, so that's good enough for me. Benny Buckets
I,
has ordained Jeremy Sanchez as a quality culture guy. It's over. What more do I need to hear? Quite honestly, what more? What more do you need?
I think it is important, and I also think that if there's one thing that the staff and really the other players have done really well is sort of keeping the overall culture in the roster and making sure that guys at the back end of the bench are still involved and wanting to kind of be a part of it. I think last season probably some injury, bad injury luck maybe sort of helped sort of guide that along, so guys didn't feel like they were getting too left out. But it is going to be something that, and I don't think we're going to look at much, in like the first month of the season. But once you start hitting like mid-January and you start seeing a few DNPs, how do those guys feel?
Yeah.
And this is honestly this is another reason why I would have liked to see another ball handler, is because I would have liked to seen a little bit more of a shift towards the upper part of that 1 through 5, and maybe a lightening of the load in the 3 and 4 area.
You're going to see that you see Mark Mitchell, you see Aiden Shaw, you see Trent Pierce and Marcus Allen, and Jacob Cruz are all in that sort of 3-4 wingy, long, kind of mix there. There's probably going to be 2 guys minimum that kind of find themselves on the outside looking in there. I think if you are Aiden Shaw, it's go time now. They didn't bring Mark Mitchell in to sit. So no. I think you can start there. I think Marcus Allen, they can sort of, pitch on a developmental kind of year. But if you're Aiden, it's you and Trent now, I think, really fighting for who's going to maybe be in that second, 4-man spot. Who's going to be second? Who's going to be third? And, right now, I would sort of, probably give a nod more towards Trent if the jumper comes back, because Mark right now doesn't have the shooting track record. You might need more of a spacer at the 4 at times. You could slide Cruz down, or you could just play Trent Pierce there. So it's going to be interesting to see what, Trent and Aiden do. It's go time for both of them. I think last year there was a bit more runway for both of them to get more minutes. Obviously, Trent had some health issues and some injuries that sort of precluded that. But Aiden just didn't shoot the ball. And that's not going to fly this year. There's enough guys that will gladly hoist up shots. So I think this is going to be interesting for those two and where they are in their development. So that's really where I think sort of the rub happens. But maybe Watkins, also has some areas where potential competition could shake out.
I mean, it's going to be competition up and down, but I see that more as an opportunity as opposed to a hindrance.
Fair.
We've got 10 players returning and 5 incoming freshmen. All of the freshmen were regarded as being quality high major prospects. Last year Mizzou was in a position where they needed those guys to be ready, and they had 3 of them. This year may be the case where they don't need them to be ready immediately, and maybe with that lack of pressure, they 1 or 2 steps up, and becomes a valuable member of the rotation. And kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier about skewing the roster down or the rotation down, I think personally, and I have not dug through the numbers, that's my off-season project, but I think this is a team where you may actually want to not do that, and you want to resist the urge of, cut it down to more of an 8 or 9-man rotation. You've got just up and down here, athletic body after athletic body after athletic body. Yeah. Use it to your advantage. You're not the biggest team. You're probably not going to be the best interior defensive team. Use that to your advantage. Press teams, create havoc, just generally run teams off the floor. You can do that with this group of players. Mizzou didn't have that the last 2 years. Both of their starting lineups had guys that prevented you from doing that. They were good at other things, so you didn't want to do that. Um, but this year, I finally see a template coming together in whole versus in part where it was last year and maybe not really at all the first year. Speaking defensively in terms of transition here, that there were multiple times last year where Mizzou had guys on the floor that didn't even look like they belonged on the same defensive team together, like with what they needed to do. You've got athletic guys like Ant Robinson, who is great at pressuring the ball in transition, and you're playing next to a guy like Nick Honor, who we like Nick Honor, but he's not that type of player. He's a half court player. His transition game is shooting 30-foot pull up threes, which he was pretty good at. But it's just an entirely different process or different type of guy. Whereas this year, instead of Nick Honor or Sean East, you're going to have a Tony Perkins next to him. And guess what Tony and Ant do? They do the same thing. They both like to pressure the ball. They both like to get out and run in transition. They both like to pressure the rim. Those are great things. So, when you look at the roster as a whole, those freshmen kind of fit into that scheme. The guys they brought in from the transfer portal fit into that scheme, and the guys that they returned from last year also fit into what they're trying to do. I think playing 10, 11, maybe even 12 guys hitting the court in a given night, not for significant minutes, obviously, but I don't see that as a problem.
Yeah, I think the one thing they'll have to do is figure out and have guys buy into those roles in their minute allocations here. I think that's going to be the crux here is how do you manage expectations and roles within that group. We've talked about, I think the one thing that they could do, probably more effectively is more token pressure dropping back into, probably more on the line, up the line stuff. I think they could really, they wouldn't token pressure so much last year because you could just really catch them out. They didn't have a lot of back line size. I think what they've got now is enough size and athleticism on the perimeter to where they can do that now. They can be a little bit more aggressive in terms of denials and rotations. I think the one thing that will be interesting is what they do with their bigs defensively. They had to sit their bigs a little deeper last year, which is very weird. They were playing more aggressive rotations, but they were still dropping guys deep. So if you beat the first line of pressure, there was not anybody there. It was, open street to the rim because that guy had to sit. So they tried to get around it by doing stuff like triple switching, by sometimes playing a little bit more tradition, by playing more push coverage. I think they're going to be able to get back to that more aggressive style that we saw in year one, where it was more straight switches, where you had more guys jumping out and hedging. It'll be interesting what they do again with the bigs along the back line, but I think they've got the personnel on the perimeter now to where you can't hunt mismatches anymore. You talked about shooting over Nick Honor. Teams would just set a ball screen and just switch it and just get Nick into it and take him out. They would do cursory switches to Barry, Sean East inside and just throw it in. I don't think you can do that anymore. There's enough athleticism and strength and size to where those obvious hunting situations are done. But, again, how aggressively would they look to press? Would it be a token press, kind of what A&M does, which is just to slow you into your offense? Or are they going to get up and look to, do a little bit more what CMA would do, which is, hey, we'll throw some token, but we'll mix some run and jump. If the right personnel group's on the floor, we'll ratchet up. So there's some flexibility, and I think that's the one thing that I at least like about this roster is, there's a good problem to have and that they can do a lot of different permutations here. I think it's going to be on the staff to manage, what roles they hand guys and do guys embrace that. I think that's always going to be a challenge there. I think when I say that I want 8 to 9 guys, there were still games against like Arkansas or Tennessee where, they wanted to chop it down and go with the guys they could trust to execute, to run offense, to get good shots. They would winnow it down, but I think there are going to be opportunities for them to expand it as well. So we'll see. But they certainly have a lot of different ingredients to play with here with this group.
And I think that is one of the things that is perhaps maybe most promising is, like when you have more options available, like there's usually more solutions once the season comes around. Yeah, there's going to be some rotational stuff to figure out, but you have multiple guys who can make shots. You have guys who have proven that they can be consistent scorers, either at, the highest level, like, Perkins, and Mitchell. Um, but you also have, well, Warwick, who is an all-time leading scorer in Northern Kentucky. Dennis Gates obviously knows the Horizon League pretty well. I would also bring up that he brought in Dree Golston, and a lot of us were pretty skeptical on that. And like both Dennis and Dree very much proved us wrong as far as like what he was going to be able to do. Like, and to their credit, and so like. And I will sort of clarify my position on Warwick is not like anti-work. I do think he could be a very useful piece. I just, for that role, I would have preferred a little bit more ball handling.
You wanted Trey Donaldson is what you wanted. You wanted Trey Donaldson. That's what you wanted.
I would have liked Trey Donaldson quite a bit.
You wanted Ant's buddy. You wanted to get the bosom buddies back together from Tallahassee.
Hey, they won a state championship in Florida. Why not win an SEC championship at Missouri?
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point on Warwick, and I think people looking at his 3-point percentage, need to understand that, again, a lot of those are dribble threes. We wrote about it. When he's set and shooting off the catch, he's good. He's good, and I think, the nice thing that you can sort of have here is what Dree could do too is you could put him in and get a little bit of microwave offense. If things were a little bit stagnant, if things weren't popping, Dree would come in and at least get, a little bit of life, a little bit of juice back. There's value in that. Mm-hmm. Once they landed Perkins, I think my qualms went down because, like, all right, Tony can initiate, get them into their stuff. But Warwick is a guy who you can trust as a second-side playmaker. He's a guy who is good in transition off, hit-aheads. There's enough there to where if he's not the primary initiator, he's fine. And because there is so much around him now, he's not going to have to take the dribble pull-ups. Like Watkins has talked about, in the past, you want guys over 24% usage because you're shaving bad shots out. All those dribble jumpers I highlighted in his commitment piece that were an issue, those can go away pretty easily because guess what? He's just spotting up now. There's somebody else that's going to be able to take those different shots. There's going to be somebody who's going to, that could be a Tamar look. That can be somebody else's shot or better shot within the flow of the offense. So they've got, I think, enough offense now to where we've talked about they're not having to scale guys up. They're going to be able to make some smart decisions about what shots get pruned out, what spots guys operate at more. They can be that flexible. Defensively, I think it's going to be interesting what direction they want to take this roster. But again, it's May. We have plenty of time to figure that out.
And I will add that you mentioned Tamar, and we haven't really talked about Tamar since he was an addition, but we had a conversation within the last week or two about the number of returning SEC players that you could say were better statistically than Tamar Bates. And our list was, 5, 6 guys maybe?
I think we were at 7. We got to 7 guys.
Okay, 7. I think I said 5 with a couple that were debatable.
His 13-game heater through the middle of the year on a normal, healthy roster would have had him tracking towards at least an all-second team.
Right. I mean, he had an excellent year.
Before the wheels fell off and he had to get 30-plus minutes a game sometimes, if Tamar had been able to stay at 28 and had the right supporting cast around him, he was easily tracking towards, at least all SEC second team. I looked at the numbers when I wrote about it last year. He was dead on tracking towards that. That's the thing now that makes you excited this year is do you have an all Big Ten second team performer in him? Do you have an all SEC second team guy in Tamar? Do you have a guy in Mark Mitchell who I think could be a defensive player of the year type of candidate if he's locked in? That means that on the wing, you've got Caleb Grill can get back to being a guy who's just spacing and being a really, really sound off-ball defender. You can kind of hide Jacob Cruz a little bit as a floor spacer and 3-and-D guy. You've got the ability now to just have Josh Gray be a guy who leans on interior bigs, who you can have just worry about rebounding, rim protecting. They've got enough flexibility now to where I think you can clearly delineate roles for guys, but more importantly, you're going to be able to take some workload off guys. I think that's probably been the biggest issue in some ways for that group last year was we saw them break down in the last 10 minutes of games. I don't think that's going to be a problem this year. I think the guys are going to be able to have the right kinds of shots, the right kinds of roles, and frankly, a workload that's sustainable over the course of 30 games. In each of the last 2 seasons, this rotation has basically been in tatters by the time they get to early March. It's been, 6 or 7 guys?
For sure. Yep.
I don't think that that's going to be a problem with this roster. I think they're going to have enough depth to keep guys fresh, to keep guys healthy. And, I think
clarify it. 6 or 7 guys that you would want to put into a high major basketball game.
Correct. Yes.
And that they did.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there were like last year, there were more than 6 or 7 guys available at the end of the year there. But whether or not some of those guys you'd want to put them in the game or not. So I think like kind of there was a small kind of news leak about Mizzou playing Lindenwood, but I don't think we really need to get into that. We can save that for a later date.
The Earl Austin Classic, baby.
Yeah, the last thing that I wanted to really kind of bring up is one of us, it was not me, and it was not the guy in the bottom, spent an entire weekend watching grassroots basketball at EYBL in Indianapolis. I believe it was Matt Harris. Matt, you went to the EYBL. I would suggest that if you're not, if you're watching this, you're subscribed. So please go read it. It's very thorough notebook on all the goings on of the Mizzou staff and kind of what the expectations were as far as the weekend was. If you are not subscribed and you're listening to this on your regular podcast feed, please go subscribe. Rockin.plus. You can read Matt's entire thoughts on his weekend in Indy and basketball gyms. Any high points you want to touch on right now?
If anybody would love to start financing Jalen Harrelson, I would more than encourage that to happen. He's a top 10 prospect. He's very, very good. I think the one thing that I didn't realize until I got to see him up close was just how truly versatile of a wing he is. He is going to be slotted as a 3. But I think I wrote in my piece, I watched 3 games in 3 different days. He took on a different role each day. One day he's, coming up as a primary initiator, getting Indy Heat into its offense, making good passes out of pick and rolls, playing under control, and, really and almost like a point guard. The next day, he needs to take over as a dominant wing scorer, and he's absolutely eating defenders alive on straight line drives, getting to the line. I think he shot 11 of 14, 12 of 20 from the floor, 11 of 14 from the free throw line, 4 of 9 from deep, 37 points, just ate up Vegas elite. That's pretty good. And then on Sunday, Sunday is the getaway day, and coaches are just used to trash panda basketball. He wasn't great, and some rim finishing, some jumpers weren't great, but the guy, did grimy work. He got points on stickbacks, angle cuts, baseline cuts. I think he scored 6 points alone just off doing what your coach tells you to do in 4th grade. If a guy's going up for a layup, follow it up for a rebound. That's 6 points just off following up missed layups.
Yeah.
It's 3rd quarter, they're up 18 points. He's diving on the floor to win a 50-50 ball back. Just 3 days of watching him play an initiator, wing slasher, and then just being a glue guy, because that's what his team needed. I think that was the biggest thing that stood out to me. If they would like to take Nick Randall early, they're in a good position there. I don't know if that's a move they'll make, but Nick Randall's a really, really, really good player out of Vashon. I think the one thing that I liked about him is, we've talked about Missouri's issues rebounding. Nick Randall can rebound. He's +7 wingspan, rebounds well outside of his area, understands how to play good sound positional D, doesn't hunt blocks, just really sound on that end of the floor. Already showing signs of being a potential connector in the spots that, Missouri's offense needs to work. Tony Irons coaches Vashon, and Vashon has his stylistic approaches, but when he gets out with BBE in the summer, the offense looks totally different, and the spots that he plays in are a little bit different, with Randall. And the kid can make plays at the elbow. He can, step out. He's trying to step out and extend his range at the top of the arc. He can run some dribble handoffs. He can make good dribble at reads. He's fantastic passing off the post. he's number 90 in the composite right now. I think that's because, sometimes the shooting and the scoring is a little bit inconsistent, but everything else that you want to see from the guy who fits that weird 4-5 hybrid in the system, he does really well. The other thing I would say is, they were tracking Jasper Johnson. He's been on campus in November. Jasper's reopened things. Look like Kentucky, you're going to go hard there. UNC's going hard. We'll see if they can hang in for him. I didn't get to see much of Dorian Jones, who was in last month for a visit. The one thing I will say before we get out of here is and I think it's important to sort of bring it up just to keep things, manageable. Aaron Rose had a really rough spring so far. I think he's only shooting around 38% from the floor. Turnover rate is 0.85, averaging 0.73 points per possession, and only attempted 6 threes so far. It has been a little bit of a slog for him. Mocan in general, I think, is on like a 7-game losing skid. They may not make Peach Jam, which is unheard of. But Rose hit a little bit of turbulence in his development, and I think part of that is, he's still a guy who maybe is 155, 160 pounds, sopping wet, listed at 6'1", which might be generous. The rim finishing is an area that's going to need to get cleaned up. He's a insanely fast straight line in the open floor. He can get into the middle gap, but sometimes, plays around the rim are tough for him. Opponents have clearly figured out that if you cut him off, he's going to hunt elbow jumpers. They sit on that. And, if you put bodies at him in front of him in slot pick and rolls, if it's not a straight line attack, there's not he's not putting guys in jail. You're not seeing snakes. You're not seeing some of the kind of really nice trade craft that you would want to start to see maybe from a point guard who's going to look to set some other guys up. Will that get better? Is this just a kind of a funk he's in right now? I think, we have to understand that that's going to happen to guys. And that he's on a roster right now that I think systematically is not going to be kind of what he plays at the collegiate level. But it's important to note that it's been a little bit of a bumpy stretch for the guy who's in the boat. And, I think a lot of people are saying, top 25 kid, plug and play, ready to go, day one. He's having a little bit of a bumpy patch right now. So we'll see how he comes out of it and how Mocan comes out of it. But, I've watched him, in every game this spring, and he's had 2 really good ones, and there have been 2 or 3 clunkers, and otherwise it's just kind of been a slog for him. So I'll just put that out there right now. That's not to say he's not a great prospect and that all the traits that we love about him aren't still there, but there's some things that are going to have to get figured out, going out of the summer and into the fall. So we'll see if, how he responds to the adversity of that. But those are sort of the big things that stood out to me, as I sort of went through the weekend.
I'd always like to, sort of add in on stuff like that whenever, I think a lot of this can also go, sort of, be applied to like Honor Batang. There's a reason why he's not like a top 5, top 10 prospect.
Right.
Like a lot of guys that sort of fall out of that range, but that are still sort of highly rated. Like there's a lot more variance to their game. Yeah, and they're looking at like projectability. Rowe is a really, really high end prospect, and there's a lot to like about him. But if he were perfect and ready to step into the starting lineup right away, he'd probably be a top 10 guy. And he's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not that there's anything wrong with that. So I don't think you're unhappy about getting an early commitment from a top 30 kid, regardless of that.
Kid. Yeah.
But it is something worth noting, and I appreciate you kind of bringing that up. Gentlemen, is there anything else that we need to hit on before we get out of here? It is we are at 54 minutes of being live.
Roster's done. It's summer mode, baby. It's summer mode.
We are officially on the bi-weekly podcast now. So next week you'll get Before the Box Score. We'll go week after that. And I think Chad and Chase Daniel are going to connect. I think tomorrow is what the plan is. So you should have something on Friday. Watkins, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
I was just thinking when Matt was talking about his EYBL journey this weekend that Jalen Harrison, if he were to commit to Mizzou, Could we get Matt Harris to do a comparison of his game versus Woody Harrelson?
It's Jalen all day. It's Jalen.
No, I want an actual breakdown of it from the movie to Jalen Harrelson. I want the full matchup.
Look, Woody's got more. Woody's got more in the mid range than Jalen does. That's not even a question.
I need to see the clips of both.
Look, I'm going to say this: if you like a guy who plays off 2 feet, it's Woody Harrelson, baby. There's some good ball fake, shoulder face. Jay Wright would love Woody Harrelson. He'd put him up, and be like, "Look at this, 2 feet on balance, keeping his options open, understanding how to manipulate defenses with ball fakes and shoulder fakes." Look, it's not even a question here. If you like a guy who
people under the age of 35 have no idea what we're talking about right now.
They don't. They don't. But Woody Harrelson and Whiteman Can't Jump, elite player off 2 feet. Don't even ask like I haven't even thought about this equation.
So there's I saw it on Twitter the other day. I had no idea this happened, despite me always wanting to watch as much Arsenio Hall show as I possibly could in the early 90s. There was a video of Woody Harrelson and Arsenio Hall on the Arsenio Hall show playing basketball against each other. And watching it makes you realize how many movie tricks existed in White Men Can't Jump. Woody looked a lot better in the movie version than live on TV facing off against an equally uncoordinated Arsenio Hall.
Look, you asked me for character here, and that's what I did. I took the tape I was given. That's why we do. That's why we go. That's why we go to live evals. It's making my point for me here. Imagine if we had been at the park watching that. We'd have been like, "No, I don't think this guy's gonna make it. I don't think he's got it." But no, we had bad scouting tape. We had early Twitter mixtapes. Is what we had in White Men Can't Jump. That's what we got, and we evaluated off the tape.
We had practice clips in Hawaiian shorts.
That's what we did. That's what we did.
So we are going to get out of here. If you are not subscribed to this podcast on your podcast app, please do subscribe. It does help us. It helps with the downloads and all those things. Make sure you're subscribed there and on YouTube. I'm not really sure what the YouTube subscriber thing does, but that's always helpful too. And if you are just listening to this on the podcast, please subscribe to Rock M Plus. You can read Matt's great EYBL eval. You can read our predictions from months ago about Mark Mitchell and Josh Gray and all that kind of stuff that did come to fruition. And hopefully some really great other content from other sports coming soon. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you in 2 weeks. I'm not sure who's going to show up for it, but in 2 weeks somebody will be here. Have a good night. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you everyone for tuning in to Rock M Radio, a proud partner of Fans First Sports Network. Rock M Radio is the official podcast network of Rock M Plus, a new and exciting subscription service provided by me and the other voices of Rock M Radio. Please take a few moments to head over to rockm.plus and sign up for an account today. The cost is only $5 a month, and the benefits include access to our live podcast, a subscriber-only message board, weekly newsletters, and more. If you enjoyed this episode of Rock M Radio and would like to see more just like it beamed directly into your personal device, make sure to click the subscribe button below and tell your friends. Our podcast feed is available through the Apple Podcast app for iPhone, Google Podcast app for Android, whatever app you listen to your podcast. You can also find Rock M Radio on Spotify. If you're looking for a podcast about your favorite team that is not the Missouri Tigers, Fan First Sports Network is your answer. A full podcast network loaded with the team-specific podcasts covering Major League Baseball, the NFL, NHL, NBA, MLS, and more. And we'll be back with more episodes of Rock M Radio coming to you soon.